Sugar Daddy Jerome making it rain. QE till infinity is here, folks. Gold has reacted. Walmart will no longer sell e-cigarettes, but you can still buy
regular cigarettes.
Absolutely. Colt stops making the AR-15s for civilians, but the military, of course, will still get their fill. Justin Trudeau getting himself in some hot water. UFOs are real. The world is so crazy. Nobody seemed to care. This is episode 37 of Bizarro World. I am your host, Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, Mr. Nick Hodge. Nick, how are you, sir?
Either living in a simulation or it's getting extremely bizarre out there. I haven't figured it out yet. How are you?
I'm running with Mr. Elon Musk's theory that this is all simulation. I think at this point, I think it has to be either that or this is going to be the most epic turning. And we talk about fourth turnings a lot here, but this is going to be one of the most epic ones. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it will absolutely be eventful. A lot going on again in a week where the Navy has confirmed that they have footage showing UFOs that didn't even really gain any traction. And I'm actually going to start there. So there were 3 videos that were posted online that have been described as being related to UFO sightings. And, you know, you get the audio, you get the video. We'll post the link up. This wasn't, you know, a civilian person on a plane recording some stuff. These were U.S. Navy pilots. These were people that are trained to spot this stuff out. And so the Navy spokesman for the U.S. actually confirmed that, yes, these are unidentified flying objects. But here's where the whole 1984 doublespeak stuff comes in, right? They didn't call them UFOs. They called them unidentified aerial phenomena. Right? Because somehow, and maybe it worked because somehow it didn't really catch on. I would think this is kind of a big deal. I don't know. Any thoughts, Nick?
Is this an extension of the Navy pilots we already knew were publicly reporting seeing UFOs? I feel like the story has been around for a bit and just can't get any traction, despite the fact that you got Navy pilots saying they're seeing stuff in the air that they've never seen before. So, I mean, what are my thoughts? Yeah, we don't know what it is. Is it extraterrestrial? I mean, that's what everyone wants to know, right? Is it aliens? Well, we don't know. UFO just means that it's unidentified. But certainly over the past, I want to say it's been like 2 years, there have been confirmed reports from respected individuals saying this stuff is going on. I feel like I'd have to do some Google searching, but I feel like just a couple of 2 months ago, there was a story about some big object over the U.S. that no one knew what it was. And that story wasn't gaining much traction either. And so, you know, I'm going to take it kind of esoteric, I guess, and say that the world is so fucked up that, you know, you got something that would normally turn heads like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or UFOs that nobody really cares about. But instead, they want to talk about, you know, pretending to storm Area 51 on social media. That seems to get a lot more traction than actual fucking UFOs. So priorities, people, priorities.
And again, we usually start and lead with the markets, but the world is so crazy and bizarro right now that we're going to lead with some of the other stuff that just makes absolutely no sense to me. Walmart deciding to stop selling e-cigarettes in the wake of, you know, and not to you know,
don't hedge, say it's fucked up.
It is absolutely fucked up, but not for the reasons you think. It's fucked up because they're still selling the cigarettes. So, right. You know, we have real cigarettes that give cancer to people and kill, you know, hundreds of thousands of people. And now we have e-cigarettes, which, you know,
have killed like 6 people, maybe.
Right. And 530 people have gotten sick. And great. I applaud the CDC for trying to get ahead of this thing. Kudos to them. But if you're going to no longer sell something because of how deadly it could be, how about you stop selling the thing that's really deadly, where the science is irrefutable, and hundreds of thousands of people have died?
So I was having this conversation with somebody this week who I know to be a former smoker and vapor about how they felt about the recent vaping deaths and the media coverage and the government response. And first, I'll give you this person's take, and then I'll give you my take. This person says, since I quit smoking cigarettes and started vaping, I feel much, much better. I feel healthier. My body feels better. It was a great alternative for me, not inhaling uh, cigarette smoke. He went on to say that some of the things we just said, it's only killed 6 people. It's been, um, at least what I read so far, kind of isolated to vitamin E acetate, specifically in like black market or shady vape cartridges. And so to outright ban the whole thing because 6 people have died, just it doesn't pass the logic test, right? Because of what you just said about real cigarettes, and let's throw alcohol in there, right? We know how many people cigarettes and alcohol kill, not just from damage it does to your body, but from getting behind the wheel after you had something to drink and taking it and killing someone that didn't have a drink at all, and alcohol is still legal. So for me, as a libertarian, as someone who likes logic, it doesn't really make sense to say let's ban these cigarettes when um, or let's ban vaping when cigarettes and alcohol is still legal. And I'm going to take this on a turn that you didn't expect, because right before we hopped on here, I was reading an article by
plot twist, everybody. Here it comes. This is why Nick's the intellect and the interesting one on the podcast. Give it to him, Nick.
By Andrew Sullivan, and he was talking about kids and gender, and how at 6 and 7 and 8 years old now, we're letting these kids, or parents are making these kids, I guess. He said, so let's say it's a boy who's 7 years old who thinks he's a girl, or thinks he's gay, or identifies as a girl. They're giving these kids like puberty blockers and like hardcore drugs and stuff at 6 and 7 years old. And that's okay because it has to do with like gender identity and politics, right? But a fucking 18-year-old can't smoke a cigarette?
There's a lot to unpack there. Before you go on, we can't just gloss over puberty blockers. You can't say puberty blockers to me and not expect me to ask you about it. What the fuck is a puberty blocker?
So I don't even know. I was just reading about it before we hopped on here, but let me find it for you, and I will try to tell you. I'll read you the sentence. So this is Mr. Andrew Sullivan. He's writing in NY Mag, and he says, yep. In the case of merely confused or less informed kids, the consequences of treatment can be permanent. Many of these prepubescent trans-identifying children are put on puberty blockers, drugs that suppress a child's normal hormonal development and were originally designed for prostate cancer and premature puberty. The use of these drugs for gender dysphoria is off-label and unapproved by the FDA. And so if you're progressive and you think a 7-year-old boy should be a girl, he can get puberty blockers. But if you're 17 and you want to vape, you can't fucking do that. And so it's just a logic clusterfuck for me that I can't get across.
It's crazy out there. It's crazy out there. We're gonna get into Japanese whiskey a little bit later on, I believe. I don't think we touched on it last week, and I know we wanted to talk about it. We're gonna talk about Colt stopping the making and the production of AR-15s for civilian purposes. And we're going to talk Justin Trudeau briefly and Amazon electric vehicles. But let's switch gears to the market. I've said for years, you've said for years, I think anybody that's been in our space has known the way that this is going to go. It's going now. It's going to be QE till infinity. And going back to my original comment about the Navy saying, oh, we're not going to call them UFOs. We're going to call them whatever the heck I said that they are calling them. It's the double speak, right? So the Fed has decided that it's going to go ahead and inject billions and billions. I'm not talking 1 and 2. I'm talking, hundreds. 75 billion into the financial markets on Friday. I'm talking, another 100 something coming in the next couple of weeks. This is quantitative easing, guys. This is QE. This is, I don't care what name you want to assign to it. The bond market's in trouble, and if you think that the U.S. is going to get the worst of it, I got news for you. This is going to cause sovereign defaults across the world, and the Fed's trying to get ahead of it. It's trapped. It's trapped. Europe's trapped. It's going to be a mess. So a little context, short-term rates shot up as high as 10% at the beginning of this week, and of course the threat was to the bond market and the overall lending system. The big threat is the bond market. And so what it's doing is the Fed is now going to offer a series of daily and 14-day term overnight, quote unquote, air quotes, repurchase agreements, right? Of at least, get this, $30 billion each. It also announced daily repos for an aggregate amount of at least $75 billion each until October the 10th. That screams volatility to me. I know that you put out a note to subscribers of, I believe, Early Advantage, your premium newsletter, where you bought the VIX, and I think you made a quick 10% and flipped it in one day. Is that accurate?
Did I do that? I'm like Steve Urkel.
believe-
Yes, I did that. We bought it yesterday at $12 flat, and surprise, surprise, something about China and pigs. I don't know. I don't know anything about that, but that was back in the news this morning, and they walked away from the table. And TVIX, we played the triple leverage because we're insane idiots. It went over 13 in less than 24 hours, and so 12 to 13.30 or something is good work if you can get it in my book. And so that's like an annual return of the stock market, right?
Absolutely. And again, this comes, so the new QE, all this, these cash injections, this hasn't happened, by the way, guys, since the global financial crisis 10 years ago, right? And this comes after the quarter point cut that the Fed announced. I mean, the dominoes are starting to fall, everybody. Keep some powder dry, get some exposure to precious metals and the quality names in the space. If you haven't already done so, we're talking our own book, of course, but this is a book that's going to prove very, very profitable. Any thoughts on the Fed's intervention? Is this something that you see as a one-off for a month? Or do you believe that this will continue indefinitely, as I do? I believe they'll just keep changing the names.
Have you ever seen the movie Coming to America?
Of course, one of my favorite movies.
So
I'm the son of immigrants. I grew up in Chicago. The movie's set in New York. It was 1987. I loved Eddie Murphy. Yes, I've seen it. I'm familiar.
So it is my favorite movie. It is not one of my favorite movies. Coming to America #1, Princess Bride #2, which they're talking about remaking this week, which is total blasphemy, but that's for another podcast.
I was going to say, they better mess that up.
Let's talk about Coming to America and what makes a joke funny. There's a scene in that movie about 3/4 of the way through when they've blown through all their money, right? Arsenio Hall, whose name is Simi in the movie, went out and bought a hot tub for their apartment, sort of pimped out their apartment. They're out of cash. And he goes to send a telegram to the king of Zamunda requesting more money. And he's requesting like a couple $100,000 for like pocket change, right? And the Brooklyn telegram agent behind the booth in a thick New York accent says, "You think that'll be enough?" And that's the joke, right? Do you think that'll be enough?
Yep.
That's the joke, because it's obviously enough fucking money to sustain yourselves on. And he's like, "Do you think I should ask for $1 million?" And so it's like the Fed, right? It's like, I want to look at like Jerome Powell and be like, "You think that'll be enough? Like, why not negative rates? Why not like a fucking $1 trillion bond buying program? Like, you guys are fucked." And like, that's the joke, right? That's what makes things funny. Like, that's why the Coming to America joke worked, because it was so obvious that was enough money. And that's why this Fed action is funny, because it's so obvious that they've lost control and that they're out of bullets and that they can't control things, because clearly their overnight repo rate just went off the rails this week when it's supposed to be closer to 2%, and it went up to 10%. That's not normal, folks. Trying to normalize and rationalize it and coming up with big words like quantitative easing and bond repurchasing and overnight repossession market. Let me put it in layman's terms. The financial system is fucked.
Agreed. And for those of you that are doubtful, that you think, okay, it's Nick and Gerardo ranting on a podcast called Bizarro World, it can't be that bad. I encourage you to just click on the link that we're going to provide to you and scroll down to the article. Scroll down the article to the bottom, and there's a slide in there that's from the Fed, and the slide shows the language and the terms and the maturity date of these things. And I'm not making this up. It doesn't even have fixed numbers, Nick. For Tuesday, September the 24th, it doesn't say 75 billion overnight and 30 billion for the 14-day term ending on 10/8/2019. It says at least 75 billion, at least 30 billion. So yeah, to tie it all in with coming to America, this is at least what it takes to keep the royal penis clean.
Mm, I was Joan of Arc in a former life.
It's crazy, guys. Let's talk gold. Gold bounced back very, very, very well. It seemed like it was headed down to touch those, 1485 levels that we said were so critical. It made a nice U-turn on a couple of things. I think the volatility in the bond market was one. I think the second thing, obviously, was the fact that it sounds like China and the U.S. all of a sudden are not getting along again for what seems like the umpteenth time. I think, again, the main theme here, everyone, is volatility, and volatility is good for gold. I do believe at some point there's going to be a false sense of stability, and maybe these at least $30 billion issues from the Fed are going to stabilize things for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but that's an illusion. That's not sustainable, and neither are trade wars. So expect a lot of volatility, and that's all good for gold. And I think we're off to real new highs in the gold price after this next little pullback happens.
Gold looks very strong, easily back to 15.15 today with only a brief soft pullback, just looking like it wants to go higher. Just haven't had to move in the juniors. We've discussed that multiple times. They're starting to put in the legwork. Had some good calls with people today, getting drill bits ready, identifying targets. I'm really looking for it. And also, um, I guess one sentiment I heard on the call today was that juniors going around looking for money, and they're kind of getting a bit of acceptance from generalists, but smart generalists, which you would like put in quotes and say this is smart money, but they're not resource smart money. They're just generalists, and they're coming back into the sector now, which is a good sign. But this person was saying they haven't seen really retail come back in, and it's retail that obviously drives stocks higher, right? And so we're getting the generalists back in now, the quote unquote smart money generalists, right? Doing a little private placements, trying to get back into the space, trying to sort out what's what, who's got recent PEAs, who's real, not real. And then, so it's just a function of time, right? Until, I don't really like the term trickle down, but until it trickles down into the retail space where those folks are finally at a point where they want to buy, not just gold, but gold equities. And so, I think the trajectory is healthy, and it's a new gold bull market, and we just have a little bit of patience.
It is, and for the contrarians amongst you, I encourage everyone to take a look at the better names in the copper space. There was news earlier this week. Amazon, this isn't a company that makes headlines for headline's sake. If they say they're going to order 100,000 electric delivery trucks as part of its ongoing carbon neutral by 2040 goal, they're going to order at least 100,000 electric delivery trucks. And so, the takeaway is you need a lot of copper. You're going to need lithium. You're going to need a bunch of things that need to be mined. And it's the trend is clear. We've had a pullback in the lithium space. I think that presents an opportunity for the better names. We've obviously had a pullback in the base metal space. I think there's a heck of an opportunity there. We had a pullback that is starting to turn back around now in the uranium space. I think we should get clarity next month on that aspect of the market. So a lot of dominoes again lining up. So where the bond market looks like it's falling apart all around the world, the commodity market to me just is screaming bargain all across the board. So pick some names and throw a dart and hold them for a little bit. And I think there's some good money to be made.
And you don't got to really take on a lot of risk, which I think is an important point. You and I, Gerardo, love the juniors, and we do a lot of speculation, but that's not all I own. I also write a front end newsletter where I've recommended companies like Franco Nevada and Wheaton Precious and some mid tier companies like Teranga, and we've done very, very well. And the company that made me want to start talking about this real quick on this podcast is Tech. I mean, if you think that we need some higher copper prices and that, the electrification of everything and batteries, et cetera. I mean, Tech's got, 4 operating mines. They've got Quebrada Blanca, and they've just been penalized because they're primarily seen in the market as a coal and oil company. But shares a couple months ago at $25 or $17 today. So you don't got to go out there looking for a 50-cent stock per se when you can go out there and buy tech with a PE of 5 and get yourself a little 1% dividend as well.
I tell you what, if you're in the Eurozone, that 1% dividend sounds mighty healthy.
So I'm going to keep going now because talking to a couple other people today, it looks like some other, excuse me, production companies are going to try to increase dividends as well. I was reading a bit about Agnico wanting to increase their dividend and a couple of other companies. And so, again, another sign of a bull market, another sign that companies are looking to attract new shareholders, another sign, or maybe not another sign, but a sign that perhaps some lessons have been learned in the resource market over the past decade of leanness, where some of these bigger operators are, I don't want to say lean and mean, but perhaps trimmed a bit and are in a position to perhaps pay a dividend as the price of the commodities they produce rises, but their costs stay the same. And so it's fun to be having these conversations finally.
It's fun to be having these conversations. Absolutely. And again, I think it just back to the bond market, right? It speaks to the better executives in the mining space recognizing that there is going to be an all-out chase for yield. And we're not talking traditional yield, 4, 5, 6% like the good old days. I think people are going to be blessed and happy if they can get 1 or 2% and, the potential for and possibility for capital gains on top of it, right? That'd be the cherry on top.
Yep, and it's a bunch of companies, like I say. I think Sabanye is looking back into paying a dividend, and so it's here, folks.
Is that the future of mining companies, the mid-tiers and the majors?
Oh, is it the future? God, I don't like crystal ball stuff. But look, in a good market, the answer is yes. If you're generating, positive cash flows, healthy operating cash flows, and you're in a position to reward shareholders, then I think yes. And especially as you said, in a low yield environment, that becomes a big carrot to get someone to buy your shares over someone else's. Not only do you get the exposure to the commodity and the capital gain upside, the appreciation, but then you get a dividend as well. I think it makes all the sense in the world.
Do you think that's an effective way for mining companies to try to extract capital from the ETFs and the passive investing vehicles that have sucked capital out of the active investors and speculators amongst us?
That was the part of the conversation I was having today. And yes, you can buy the GDX, you can buy the GDXJ, but you don't get any yield. You're paying a management fee. And so if you can, I mean, gosh, there's not that many quality companies anyway, as you and I know, Gerardo. So you can make your own stinking ETF, right? And that's what people should be doing, maybe by subscribing to newsletters of people that write about these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Another commodity related story that obviously has societal and geopolitical ramifications is the potential for an all-out war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, with the obvious proxies, right? The U.S. and everything else that entails. You and I have not spoken about this. I would love to hear your thoughts on the very targeted and coordinated attack, and effective, I might add. We're talking, what was it? 7 cruise missiles were launched in the assault. 3 missiles failed to hit their targets. The other 4 hit the targets. I think there were 18 drones used. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nick.
I don't think I have well-formed thoughts if I'm being honest. What I have seen is that one, there's not a lot of great information out there and truly transparent information. We just had Saudi Arabia yesterday or the day before try to make the case that it was Iran, and that was 4 or 5 days after the events. Another thing that struck me weird, and sorry, this is going to be sort of scattered. This is just verbal diarrhea. What I think about this is it happened last Saturday, right? And, you and I are glued to Twitter and whatever it is. And so, within seconds of this happening, the world knows that it happened, or anybody that's paying attention, right? But then it sort of disappeared for the next 2 days because, in my opinion, because markets were closed. And I really didn't, it wasn't like a Twitter trend. Should be a number one Twitter trend within like 45 seconds, right? Didn't become a trend on Twitter. I didn't see a lot of stuff about it. Sunday, still nothing. But then Monday I get up and I I started looking at the news and what's trending, and then there it is on Monday morning. It's back. It's the number one trend, and it's like, wait, when markets are about to open, it's been 2 days, and now we're putting this back in the trends. Like just the flow of information and the way it was covered, and when the event itself became popular in the news cycle was just all off to me. And then initial reports, and I'm not going to hedge. I'm just going to tell you what I think. Initial reports were all over the place. It's the Houthis, right? It's those
Yep.
goddamn Houthis. Like I don't know.
With the cruise missiles and the 18 drones.
Right, exactly. And then well, I didn't even hear anything about missiles at first. It was just drone attack, right? Drone attack and Houthis, and then it's missiles in Iran, and then it's the missiles went through Iraq. It could be Iraq, and then it's no, Iran sent the missiles through Iraq because to throw off the trail, and it's like, man, y'all need to get your stories straight and really put the narrative forward because no one's believing whatever y'all trying to get them to believe. And so, let me take a step back and let's go to the killing of Khashoggi a couple of months ago, and how
Mm.
brutal the regime of Saudi Arabia truly is, and the fact that they're not really our ally, they just buy our support. Where do I want to go with that? And then I want to talk about Epstein for 1 second. And you and I have talked
Oh.
about that in depth on this podcast, and how the world sort of looks at it now as not even a tinfoil hat. They just look at it and they say, "Yep, that was a conspiracy. That guy needed to die because he was gonna out a bunch of people." And so, just look at these events of the past couple of months: the Epstein thing, the Khashoggi thing, and it's like, you really think at face value people are looking at this and saying it's Iran? Everyone I've talked to, and including myself, looks at this and says, "False flag."
Yep. Agreed. Agreed 100%. It has ramifications in the commodity space. Again, the ramification is increased volatility, right? Which is, um, again, it presents an opportunity if we want to talk just making money. There's obviously real human um, cost associated with it. So it's I think that's where we're headed globally. There's going to be increased volatility that allows for the better informed and bold to make vast sums of money. And it's going to be at the expense of the bulk of the people that really have absolutely nothing to do with it, which, is a tragedy in itself, but it all points in that direction. Am I wrong on that, Nick?
No, not at all. And another thing that has changed is just the simple dynamics of the oil market. If this had happened 10 years ago, I think you see $100 oil overnight, but that wasn't the case here. The case here was that really only Brent increased, and really only for a short period of time. WTI didn't really see the same spike because our crude here is lighter and sweeter, and we produce a lot more of it than we did 10 years ago. If you've been paying attention, you know that all these fracking basins are online. The U.S. produces enough oil to technically be self-sufficient, the most we've produced in decades, and so you don't see. We're insulated from what happened in Saudi Arabia last weekend. There's been no price spikes at the gas pump. There's been really no continued coverage of it. It sort of disappeared from the market headlines, and the only reason I bring that up is to tell you that markets change, and the people who produce our commodities, at least the majority of them, those ebb and flow as well. And so, whereas 10 years ago we would have been 60% reliant, these numbers are close, but they're probably not exact, 60% reliant on foreign oil, the bulk of which is coming from Saudi Arabia. Now that has changed. And I say all that to say there are other spaces in the commodity sector where that is not the case. I'm thinking of, and let's tie it back to lithium, right? If the future is a lithium, if Amazon is buying 100,000 electric vehicles, and you can blow up Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure without really a lot of consequences in the price of oil in the market. I know I'm not tying this together well, but here's what I'm going to say. What are the things you need for batteries? The rare earths, the
Hmm.
lithiums, the manganese, the nickel, and so what are the commodities that countries are trying to get a stranglehold on now? Oil is sort of like, it's not an afterthought. Obviously, the global economy is still based on oil, but there's a lot of countries that produce oil now, and specifically the U.S. producing a lot. Have I made a point there? Was that clear at all? But so now what you're seeing is China trying to lock up rare earths, China trying to lock up lithium. It's the world is changing, folks, is what I'm saying. The oil is not as important going forward.
Makes perfect sense. Is compressed air energy storage the next big mega trend?
I was going to ask if Amazon was going to power all those cars with compressed air.
I know you want to
Uh,
talk about compressed air.
it's so trite and tiring, Gerardo. I really don't want to talk about it, but of course I'm going to. And so today I'm scrolling through, or maybe it was yesterday, and I see a tweet from Quartz, the media outlet Quartz, that says, "Is storing energy in compressed air finally going to be the thing that allows renewable electricity to become cheap enough for the big time?" And immediately I'm thinking in my head, no, the fuck it's not, because it was it didn't work 10 years ago and it's not going to work now. And so I start scrolling through my emails, and sure enough, what do I find? A paper in my email from 2008 from, it was either Columbia or Cornell University, talking about how we were going to compress air and the companies involved. And then I went through my emails from 2008 that had compressed air in them. And sure enough, Gerardo, in 2008, compressed air was going to be the thing that made renewable energies price competitive, because we're going to use the solar and wind energy to compress the air, to pump it into caves. That way, when we need the electricity, we're going to reverse the flow of the air that we compressed in the caves to turn a turbine to then produce electricity when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. And so, um, no, I
There's
mean,
not money to be made.
yeah, it doesn't work. And so they admit that in the lead of the article. I'm just trying to find it now. They're saying that while lithium ion batteries have started to meet some of the need, they're not plentiful enough for large scale energy hoarding. And then it goes on to say that this company started in 2010. Oh, yeah, did they really start in 2010? That's exactly what I'm saying. No, they never scale. So, like, these companies, and there's been a couple of them, they'll get $3 or $5 million to do a little pilot project, and they'll do one. They'll compress air inside of a shipping container or something, and then use the air that was in a shipping container to power a turbine. And so it works in principle, but it doesn't work when you scale it out. I mean, this has been used. Don't get me wrong. It's a viable idea. The physics behind it are sound. It has been used in some cases to restart power plants by compressing air, but there has been no project in the past decade that comes anywhere close to being economically viable to scale up to use compressed air energy storage as a means for making renewable energy price competitive at grid cost.
So, in other words, if you see a promo, people out there, that says the next big mega trend is compressed air energy storage, this is the Amazon killer. Don't fucking click on it.
Oh,
Keep your money.
last week, if you remember, we were going to use the renewable electricity to hoist concrete blocks up in the air, and then when they fall, then we're going to use the stored kinetic energy to turn a turbine. It's almost maddening.
It is almost maddening. Let's talk about Colt stopping the making of AR-15s for civilian use. Right? It's suspending the manufacturing of the AR-15, which of course is, well, it's the weapon of choice for mass murderers, basically. And whatever you feel about the AR-15 and the Second Amendment, this is a private corporation deciding to do what it said is what the market is telling it. They said it wasn't from pressure from politicians or anything like that. They said the market for modern sporting rifles has experienced significant excess manufacturing capacity. Simple supply and demand story. I know politicians and
Yep.
the ideologues amongst us tried to make it a left and right issue. Company CEO came out and said that absolutely wasn't it. Any thoughts there, Nick?
I haven't dove deep into it. I saw the story yesterday. I think you framed it pretty well. It's a temporary suspension, as Colt said itself, to focus on production of those ARs for military purposes. They said they could return to producing them for the civilian market. But no, we talked about Walmart CEO 2 weeks ago, I think it was, saying that they were going to stop selling them, and they were also going to stop selling handgun ammunition. And I suppose that's the right of an individual company. And so, no, not a lot of thoughts. Well, yeah, I have thoughts, I guess. You know I do. I think that it could probably stoke demand, right? Because these are the sort of stories that make people run out and buy ARs all the time, right? Colt stops manufacturing AR. I guarantee there was 100 folks yesterday who ran to their local Cabela's and bought an AR because of that article. And so, one I don't worry about, but I think that that makes people buy more guns out of fear. And so the ideologues who use an article like that to show that the market is turning or whatever may just be stoking more gun sales. The other thing I wanted to talk about that I put next to the story on a little sheet was those
Hmm.
ads from um,
Yeah.
the anti-gun ads from the Sandy Hook Promise group. Did you get the chance to watch that ad this week by any
I
chance?
did the back to school ad where I got my new
Oh
shoes.
my God.
Yeah.
I first of all,
Yeah.
I got the chills the first time. The second
Yep.
time I watched it, I teared up a bit, and the third time I watched it, I just sort of stared blankly at the screen after it was over because it was so impactful that it just resonated so much. You got these kids talking about my mom got me these new headphones because they helped me study in the library, and I got my whatever. I got my new backpack because I'm ready to go back to school. And then it's so well done. Like the school shooting breaks out, and you can start to hear the shots in the background, and the kid's like, my brand new shoes are going to come in handy, and he starts running away from the shooting, right? And then there's another girl
Yep.
that's like, oh, my new shirt can really come in handy too. And she's using it as a tourniquet to tie off this other girl's leg. And then the very last scene is this girl sitting on top of a toilet with her phone saying, oh, I finally got a new phone so I can stay in touch with my mom. And she's texting her mom, I love you, right? As the shooter walks into the bathroom. And that's sort of the end of the commercial. And if that doesn't hit you as a human being, then you're not a human being. And so it's a massive debate. It's a massive issue. What do you do? I mean, these ads are clearly resonating with people like me who are as staunch a proponent of the Second Amendment as there is, but at the same time, you can't have people running in and shooting up dozens of your country's kids on a seemingly weekly basis. And so not a lot of answers you're going to hear from me other than to say I can give you my personal experience. So this very week, my daughter is 3.5 years old. Next
Hmm.
next year, we want her to go to preschool, like 3 days a week, and so we're starting to take the tours. We're starting to email the principals. We're starting to do the research, this and that, right? And so, um, these administrators have got to be getting questions from parents like me. Like I've never had a kid in elementary school. I know you have, but like,
Yep.
are these parents asking about active shooter drills? Are they concerned that like fosters more fear or is not really a great combatant to reducing the amount of shootings, but rather just responding to them and sort of like getting under your desk in the '60s when the Russians were going to nuke us, right? It just makes the body count easier afterward. That's sort of what these defense drills do. Go under your desk and you can get shot there, and it's easier for us to count your dead body when you're all lined up in a row under the desk. And so, a tough issue. I'll tell you where we're at just in cursory research is we're leaning towards private school, right? Who wouldn't if you had the means to? I was looking today, 25% of schools in this country are private, but only 10% of schools, 10% of kids are in a private school. Does that make sense? So a quarter of the schools
Absolutely.
are private, but only 10% of kids are in private school. 96% of school shootings happen, 94 to 96% happen on public school grounds. And so when you look at that statistic, and you say, well, I have the means to put my kid in private school where only 4 to 6% of the school shootings happen. We're going to tour a couple private schools in the next couple of weeks, but that doesn't solve the issue for anyone else. And it sort of opens up another issue, which I had never really thought about as a father before, and that's like, or even as a citizen, is what's with the public schools and the shootings and why not in the private schools? I haven't really, I'm sure there's been research that I haven't read and I'll try to read some of that, but there's something there, right? Why are 94 to 96% of the shootings in public schools?
Yeah, I haven't dug into the data enough to give you an intelligent answer. I just I'll respond by saying this. I have my three boys. My youngest is 11. He's in junior high now. I have a 16-year-old in high school, and yeah, I've talked about this before. I've had to have conversations with both of them about what to do if something like this happens. And the bottom line is, there's not a lot you can do. You run away from the gunshots. You call us immediately. And then the truth is, you cross your fingers and you hope that the school resource officer, if your school has one, doesn't run the other way. And you hope that they're in a position to be able to take someone out. We had a situation here, and I live, just outside of Austin, in a suburban, relatively well-off community. And, we have resource officers in front of the school, and the school does a great job of implementing all sorts of security checks, so where you can't just walk into the school and say, hey, I'm here to pick up my kid. Oh, and by the way, let me start shooting shit up. But we had a situation this week, where we got a notice from the school saying, we had a gentleman that walked onto our campus pretending to be a student. He was clearly not. He was an adult. And luckily the resource officer spotted him outside. He was denied entry because he didn't have the proper identification to get into the office. And so, my follow-up question to the administration was, well, was this gentleman armed? Did this person have priors? And they couldn't answer that at the time because it had just happened. But, what do you do? This is America in 2019. This has gone so far off the rails that there isn't just one answer. It's going to be 10 action baby steps that hopefully lead to cumulative results, right? It's going to have to take, a restructuring of our mental health approach here in this country and quit treating that like a crime. It's going to take a restructuring of how we approach drug offenders whose only crime is being addicted to drugs. It's going to take the way that we sell ammunition and who is able to buy that ammunition, and in the amounts and quantities that they're able to buy that ammunition. It's going to take the implementation of something you touched on before, smart gun cases, right? There's all sorts of small things that we can do that I do believe will add up, not just to prevent mass shootings, but to prevent accidental shootings. How many stories have we heard of, the 6-year-old kid that walks into his dad's or mom's room and sees, the handgun that was left out and decides to play shoot 'em up and ends up shooting himself in the head and dies. Yep. We've seen lots of those accidental shootings, so many things that can be prevented by taking some of the small steps. And again, I'm an optimist when it comes to the youth leading that charge. I don't believe we're there yet. I don't believe there's the political will yet in this country, not by the people, but by the politicians. I don't think that is there yet. We can't do the small things. Corporations are stepping up. Look, when fucking Walmart is the bastion of integrity when it comes to handguns and ammunition and AR and Colt, I mean, come on. We got a long way to go, everybody. But I'll say this, the people on both the right and the left that are elected to pass laws that allow us to protect ourselves in a reasonable way are not doing their jobs. It's that simple, and we all know why, and we don't have to get into it. We've talked about lobbyists and the money in politics, but it's going to take everybody chiming in and pitching in and voting these assholes out of office and bringing in people that can actually work together in a bipartisan way and at least start with some smaller, smart solutions.
It's very complex, as you said, and it's not lost on me that it's a relatively recent phenomenon as well that started in or around the mid 90s, let's say, with Columbine, but probably aligns nicely with, a lack of wage growth for the middle class and the lack of upward mobility and the need of parents to work multiple jobs to provide for their families, thereby not spending as much time with their children. Look at that Freudian slip right there.
America 2019. There you go.
Exactly right. And so
yeah, it's so top of mind that you think children and you think killings and that, like, yeah, Freudian slip, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's cultural, I guess, is what I was trying to say. It's obviously guns and bullets are a part of it, but you touched on the mental health and you touched on other things. But it's also about opportunity and optimism and thinking there's something to live for and thinking things are going to get better. If you talk to people like when I was in middle school and high school, and I was in high school in the late 90s around the Columbine time, but it was not like, I could fight this kid after school or I could, I don't know, throw a milk at him in lunch. Those are my options. Or maybe I could give him a wedgie or try to fight for myself. But it's never like shooting up the school was just never an option. Like it wasn't like on the multiple choice list. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's crazy.
It's definitely a different time. I don't think it's a coincidence either that the shootings started happening right around the time that we as a country really, a lot of us, not me and my household, but a lot of us turned our kids over to the doctors, prescribing all sorts of antidepressants. And again, I'm not one of these conspiracy theorist nut guys that just believes everything that he reads, but there is correlation with the way that we've drugged our kids.
Like Adderall, the legal meth, you mean?
Yeah, like Prozac back in the 90s. I think all of the Columbine shooters, or a good percentage of them, were all on antidepressants. That was the Prozac stage, and then that was followed by Zoloft, and then that was followed by the next thing. And again, it's all the same shit. It just takes on a different name, right? Which is how we started this whole podcast, right? QE. Sugar Daddy Jerome, make it rain. You call it whatever the fuck you want to call it. An overnight repo sale that lasts a whole month. Put whatever name you want on it. The shit is about to hit the fan is what that is. UFOs, unidentified aerial objects, call it whatever you want to call it, people. You could double speak it all you want. There are clear steps that we can take, not to fix it. I don't think it ever is completely fixed, but to try to mitigate it, to try to prevent it, to try to make it less so. And again, we're not just talking about the extreme mass shooting that is becoming less and less extreme in this country, but also all the accidental shootings that happen that are just as heartbreaking. And there's a lot of common sense stuff that we can do. There's just no political will to do it right now. And hopefully that changes.
And you talk about the drugs and how they're responsible, and we did the Prozac and the Zoloft and the antidepressants, and I forget the number off the top of my head how many Americans are on antidepressants, but it's tens of millions, and so certainly a mental health crisis, and then really to put a bookend on it with how corporations get to say what they want and get away with things, and how that leads to the suppression of the middle class and lack of wage growth because we're not reinvesting in our communities and our workers, but instead doing share buybacks. And then you have this whole Purdue Pharma thing separately responsible for an entirely different health crisis, and we're going to let them off scot-free. And so that's just sort of ties it all together very nicely.
Yeah, just a cursory search of how many Americans are on antidepressants. Think about this. 1 in 6 takes some kind of psychiatric drug, mostly antidepressants. 1 in 6, and you got to figure a good portion of those babies.
Yep.
Yeah, and you got to figure a good portion of those are kids who aren't eligible yet, right? It's insane.
Maybe we can throw some puberty blockers in there as well.
Yeah, maybe we could throw some puberty blockers. One last stat for you guys and gals. Antidepressant use has jumped 65% in 15 years. And again, we're not talking from 1995. This is from 15 years ago. This is from 2004, right? So the baseline isn't zero. The baseline was already pretty extreme back in the early 2000s. So yeah, it's there's a lot of things to address in this country and on this planet. And I know there's we could be here forever, but let's end it on a happy note. Japanese whiskey.
It's not going to be happy.
Come on, Nick.
No, I'll try to find a happy story for you in the next 45 seconds while I'm talking about this. But no, this is Bizarro World stuff. Japanese whiskey is fake. So in the past, you've seen it. The Suntory, you've seen the Suntory rise to fame. You've seen the bottle on the top shelf at your favorite bar with the Japanese letter on it that's whiskey. You've heard about this phenomenon, right, Gerardo? I know you have.
I have indeed.
Well, it's fake because in America and in Europe, there are regulations on what you can call bourbon. The mash has to be a certain amount, whatever grain, corn or rye, whatever it is, to be called a certain thing. And certainly the same in Scotland and Ireland, where the process matters and the ingredients matter as to what you get to call Irish whiskey and what you get to call Scotch. Well, not so in Japan, which is not necessarily a whiskey culture. As we all know, they're a sake culture. But hey, that's neither here nor there, I guess, in global markets. So there's no regulations in whiskey, and so you got these Japanese whiskey companies. I'll put the article up in Bloomberg. Some of them that have only been in business for 12 months, selling 18-year-old aged whiskey. Can you think about that for a second?
What the fuck?
And so someone smarter than me,
it's like the Impossible Burger, right? This is the Impossible Whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. Started doing the research and pulling the thread on the sweater to see where all this led, and come to find out, basically the imports of American and Irish and Scottish whiskey to Japan have significantly increased in the past decade. You want to tie it together for me? Have I given you enough information yet? Or do you
I want you to do it because it's going beautifully.
So the Japanese whiskey companies, who are currently the most popular whiskey companies in the world, Give
it to me with sarcasm, Nick. Give it to me with sarcasm. That's what I was looking for.
Serving up what whiskey snobs would tell you is the best whiskey because of the processes that you just have to taste, because the Japanese are doing such a fine job of making this new whiskey. They're selling you the fucking Scotch.
Society gets the whiskey it deserves. Unreal. Follow that up.
They are selling you the Scotch with Japanese characters painted on the label.
Unreal. Yeah, I should not be surprised, but you would think that at some point the $4,000 bottle of whiskey, Japanese whiskey, would come with some sort of guarantee, right?
You can't make it up. When I read that the 1-year-old company was selling 18-year-old whiskey, I almost fell out of my office chair.
That brings me to my next question. We'll wrap it up with this because it's going to be a good laugh. Have you had an Impossible Burger?
I haven't. We were at a restaurant yesterday where there was one on the menu. It was a Beyond Burger they were serving. It wasn't a fast food restaurant, which is, I guess, speaks to the trend. They were serving it at an actual fast casual restaurant. But no, I haven't had one yet. Have you?
I have not. I am on a mission this week to try one. I will be open-minded. I will go have one. My favorite burger joint in Austin, Hop Dottie's Burger Bar, just put one on their menu or on its menu, and I plan on making a pit stop this week, and I will report back and let you know what I think. I'm hoping I like it. I'm not going into this saying, man, this is bullshit. I think it's bullshit, but I'm hoping I like it. We'll see. I'll let you know.
And I'll really leave it off on a funny note and a positive vibe for this week. You know what else I saw today? You know how always every Halloween season there's a new trendy outfit that's like the Halloween costume of the season. You know what's hot seller so far this year?
What's the hot seller?
The sexy Beyond Meat Burger. I'll put a link.
Can we put a link up for that?
Oh, I'll put a link.
I have to see the sexy Beyond Meat Burger. That might go well at the costume party. I plan on attending.
All in this bizarro world.
So let me ask you this:
Is it
a male costume or a female costume?
Well, I don't think it's gender appropriated, but I'm thinking, what all the kids are saying these days. If you got a nice female wearing it, you know what the line could be, Gerardo. Oh, girl.
Well, I was thinking the other way around.
Oh, girl, you're looking like a snack.
I'm thinking two nice female buns, and hey, somebody's got to be the.
Fake meat, fake news.
Fake meat, fake news. Episode 37, Bizarro World. I'm Gerardo Del Real with my co-host Nick Hodge. Love each other. Be nice to each other. Say something nice to someone you don't know. Don't be creepy about it. But go be nice to people that you're not normally nice to and see if you get something back, man. It might make the world a better place. One person at a time, everybody. Enjoy your week.
See ya.